Think you know how England was born? Think again. This is the insane true story your history book skipped, where Viking warlords played for keeps, a Saxon king fought from the shadows, and one bloody day at Hastings changed everything forever. Stick around, because what you're about to hear will rewrite everything you thought you knew about medieval Europe. And trust me, your friends will be talking about this tomorrow. Don't be the only one who missed out on history's most epic power struggle. Chapter 1. The Land Before England. The story of England begins long before it was even called England, back when the land was wild, untamed, and ruled by tribes who owed nothing to kings or empires. Picture this: thick forests, rolling green hills, and scattered villages where the Celtic Britons lived. These were fierce people, proud of their clans, worshipping gods of the earth and sky. They built hill forts to defend their lands and traded with distant tribes across the sea. Life was tough, but it was theirs, until the Romans came knocking. In 43 AD, the Roman war machine landed on Britain's shores, led by Emperor Claudius, who wanted to add this mysterious island to his growing empire. The Britons, led by warriors like Caratacus and later the legendary Boudicca, fought back hard. Boudicca's rebellion nearly drove the Romans out. Her warriors burned Londinium, modern London, to the ground, but in the end, Rome's discipline and steel won out. For nearly 400 years, Britannia was Roman. They built roads that still exist today, grand villas with heated floors and bustling towns where Latin was spoken alongside the old Celtic tongues. But empires don't last forever. By the early 5th century, Rome was crumbling under its own weight, pulling its legions back to defend the heartland. The Britons, left on their own, suddenly had to face a world without Roman protection, and worse, new invaders sailing across the North Sea. The Angles, Saxons and Jutes, Germanic tribes from what's now Denmark and northern Germany, came first as mercenaries, then as conquerors. They didn't just raid, they settled, pushing the Britons west into Wales and Cornwall. By the time the last Roman outposts faded into memory, Britain was no longer Britannia. It was a fractured land of warring kingdoms, forgotten ruins, and a people caught between the old world and the new. The stage was set for an even greater struggle, one that would, centuries later, give birth to England. Chapter 2. The Rise of the Anglo-Saxon Kingdoms. With the Romans gone and the Britons pushed to the edges of their own land, the Angles, Saxons and Jutes didn't just settle in, they made themselves at home. Imagine the scene. Small bands of warriors, hardened by years of battle, carving out territories in the rolling English countryside. At first, they were just scattered tribes, each with its own chief, each fighting for survival. But over time, these war bands grew into something bigger, kingdoms. By the 6th century, Britain was a chessboard of rival Anglo-Saxon realms, each vying for power. In the north, Northumbria rose to dominance, its kings claiming lands from coast to coast. In the Midlands, Mercia flexed its muscles under ruthless rulers like Penda, a pagan warlord who took on Christian kings and won. Down in the south, Wessex, land of the West Saxons, slowly grew in strength, though it wasn't yet the powerhouse it would become. And then there was Kent, where the first Christian missionaries arrived, bringing not just a new religion, but ties to the wider world. These kingdoms weren't just fighting each other, they were fighting the past. The ruins of Roman towns still stood, crumbling reminders of a lost age. Some Anglo-Saxon kings reused old Roman forts, others ignored them completely, building their own great halls where mead flowed and warriors swore loyalty in exchange for gold. The Britons, now pushed into Wales and Cornwall, weren't gone either. They launched raids, told stories of Arthur, a legendary leader who might one day return and drive the invaders out. But the Anglo-Saxons weren't going anywhere. By the 8th century, Mercia's king Offa was so powerful he built a massive earthwork, Offa's Dyke, to mark the border between his lands and the Welsh. He even minted his own coins, some bearing his name, like a medieval CEO branding his empire. For a moment it seemed like Mercia might unite all the Anglo-Saxon lands under one crown. But history had other plans, because just when it looked like one kingdom might finally come out on top, a new threat appeared on the horizon, one that would shake Britain to its core. The Vikings were coming. Chapter 3. The Viking Storm. The first sign was the smoke. On a quiet morning in 793, monks at the island monastery of Lindisfarne looked up from their prayers to see strange ships slicing through the waves, long, sleek, and carved with snarling dragon heads. Before anyone could sound an alarm, warriors with wild hair and axes stormed the shore. They burned the church, slaughtered the helpless monks, and hauled away treasures of gold and silver. By the time they vanished back into the mist, the message was clear. The Vikings had arrived and they weren't here to trade. At first, everyone hoped it was just a one-time raid, something to mourn and then move on. But Lindisfarne was only the beginning. Year after year, Viking longships appeared like ghosts along the coast, striking without warning. They hit monasteries first, easy targets packed with riches and defenseless men, but soon they grew bolder. Villages, market towns, even fortified settlements fell under their axes. The Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, busy fighting each other, were completely unprepared. By the 860s, the raids turned into full-blown invasion. A massive Viking force, the Great Heathen Army, swept across England like a winter storm. They crushed Northumbria, strangled East Anglia where they executed King Edmund by turning him into a pincushion of arrows, and shattered Mercia's power. Only Wessex, the last standing Anglo-Saxon kingdom, stood between the Vikings and total conquest. The situation looked hopeless. Viking warlords carved out their own territories, settling in the north and east, a region now called the Danelaw, where Norse customs ruled. Towns like York became Viking strongholds, bustling with traders speaking Old Norse instead of Old English. For a while, it seemed like England might disappear entirely, swallowed up by these pagan invaders. But in the shadows of Wessex, a young king was watching, waiting, and planning his revenge. His name was Alfred, and he wasn't about to let his kingdom, or his people, vanish without a fight. Chapter 4. Alfred the Great and the Fight for Survival. The year was 878, and England was dying. Viking warlords ruled the north and east, their great heathen army carving the land into pieces. Wessex, the last free Anglo-Saxon kingdom, was on its knees. King Alfred, just 29 years old, had spent months running for his life, hiding in the soggy marshes of Somerset with a handful of loyal warriors. The Vikings had taken his castles, burned his villages, and forced him into exile. Most men would have given up. But Alfred wasn't most men. From his swampy hideout, Alfred began plotting his comeback. He sent out spies, gathered scattered Saxon fighters, and quietly rebuilt his army. Then in the spring, he struck. At the Battle of Edington, Alfred's forces clashed with Guthrum, the Viking king. The fight was brutal, shield walls splintering, axes crashing, but when the dust settled, it was Alfred who stood victorious. But here's the thing about Alfred. He wasn't just a warrior, he was a thinker. Instead of slaughtering Guthrum's men, he made a deal. The Vikings could keep the lands they'd taken, the Danelaw, but they had to convert to Christianity and swear peace. Guthrum even took a Christian name, Ethelstan, and became Alfred's unlikely ally. Alfred didn't stop there. He built fortified towns called burhs to protect his people, created England's first navy to stop future Viking raids, and even started schools to teach his nobles to read. He knew that survival wasn't just about swords, it was about laws, learning, and loyalty. By the time Alfred died in 899, Wessex wasn't just surviving, it was thriving, and for the first time, people began whispering about an idea that would change history, a single, united England. But the Vikings weren't done yet, and neither was Alfred's family. Chapter 5. The Making of a Kingdom. Alfred was gone, but his dream lived on, and his children were ready to finish what he started. Edward, Alfred's son, didn't waste any time. The moment he became king, he marched his army into Viking-held territory, tearing through their defences like a storm. Towns that had bowed to Norse rule for decades suddenly found themselves under Saxon banners again. Edward wasn't just fighting for land, he was stitching England back together, piece by bloody piece. Then came Athelstan, Edward's son and Alfred's grandson. If Edward was a hammer, Athelstan was a scalpel, sharp, precise and ruthless. He didn't just want to push the Vikings back, he wanted to erase their grip on England for good. In 927 he marched north and took York, the Viking capital, crushing any resistance. But his real masterpiece came at the Battle of Brunanburh, where he faced an alliance of Vikings, Scots and Welsh rebels. The battle was a slaughter. By the end of it, 5 kings lay dead, and Athelstan stood unchallenged. For the first time in history, all of England, from the rocky coasts of Cornwall to the wild northern hills, answered to one king. Athelstan didn't just call himself King of Wessex anymore, he declared himself King of the English. Coins were minted, laws were written, and borders were drawn. England wasn't just an idea now, it was real. But peace? That was another matter entirely. Because while Athelstan had built a kingdom, keeping it would take more than just one man's will. And fate had a way of testing kings. Chapter 6. The Norman Conquest and the Birth of Medieval England. England had survived Vikings, civil wars and shaky alliances, but 1066 would test it like never before. The year started with a king's death. Edward the Confessor, childless and deeply religious, passed away in January, leaving the throne up for grabs. In stepped Harold Godwinson, a powerful noble with the backing of England's lords. He was crowned immediately, but 2 other men thought the crown belonged to them. Harold Hardrada, the fearsome Viking king of Norway, and William, Duke of Normandy, a French-speaking warlord who claimed Edward had promised him the throne years earlier. Harold barely had time to catch his breath before Hardrada invaded the north with 10,000 Vikings. At the Somme Battle of Stamford Bridge, Harold's forces crushed the invaders in a brutal fight. Legend says a lone Viking axeman held the bridge single-handedly until an English soldier floated underneath and stabbed him from below. Victory was sweet, but it came at a cost. Exhausted and bloodied, Harold's army now had to march 300 miles south, because William had landed. On October 14th, at the Pai Battle of Hastings, Harold's weary troops formed a shield wall on a hilltop. William's Normans charged again and again, their cavalry hacking at the Saxon lines. For hours it worked, until a feigned retreat tricked the English into breaking formation. That was the end. Harold died with an arrow through his eye, maybe the Bayeux Tapestry is vague, and by Christmas, William was crowned king in Westminster Abbey. The Normans didn't just take the throne, they reshaped England. Castles sprang up like stone fists across the land. French became the language of the elite, while Saxon peasants grumbled in their fields. The Domesday book recorded every pig and acre, turning England into a taxed, organized kingdom. It was brutal, it was bloody. But from this mess, medieval England was born, and somehow, despite everything, the English endured, just like they always had. The end? Or just the beginning?